Right, in this video, we are going to be doing problem number 4 from homework 11.2. The directions are to solve the equation using factoring or the quadratic formula, whichever is possible. I want to do this exact problem with you on a separate piece of paper, and then we'll talk about how to enter the answer on the computer. All right, so the first thing, the quadratic formula has an A in it. And so I recommend replacing all those A's with X's. We're not doing a different problem, but it'll just simplify things for us. This is optional, but I think it's helpful. Replace all the A's with X's. All right, because maybe we have to use the quadratic formula here. Regardless of whether or not I'm going to solve this by factoring or the quadratic formula, I need to set this thing equal to 0. So I'm going to go ahead. Here's my equal sign. I'm not losing track of it. I'm going to go ahead and add 3x squared to both sides. There are no x squared terms on the left-hand side. So we've got 3x squared plus 4x plus 4 equals 0. All right? Now, let's try factoring. My leading coefficient is a 3. 3 is prime, so I know that that 3x squared came from a 3x times a 3x. And there aren't that many numbers that multiply together to give me 4, right? We've got 2 and 2, as well as minus 2 and minus 2, but I know that we don't have to consider the negatives because when you multiply everything out and combine like terms, I have a positive amount of x left over. So I could try positive 2 and positive 2. I could try a positive 1 and a positive 4, and here order matters because 3x and 1x are different. Now let's just see these. If I multiply my outer and inner terms, I get 3x times 2 is a 6x, and 2 times x is a 2x. That's not equal to 4x. Okay, so I know that it's not that pairing. If I try a plus 1 and a plus 4, we get 3 times 4, we have a 12x. 1 times x, we've got a 1x. 12x plus 1x is not equal to the 4x, right? And we're supposed to end up with 4x. So I know that this guy doesn't work. And if I try the 4 here and the 1 there, we've got 3x and a 4x. Adding those together, we don't get 4x. So this thing is not factorable. In other words, we need the quadratic formula. All right. So this was just a little bit of an anecdote. It's good to try. And those of you that just aren't the biggest fan of factoring probably will like the quadratic formula because it's always going to work. So let's go ahead and use our quadratic formula. 3x squared plus 4x plus 4 equals 0. All right, so now we need to go ahead and identify our A. A isn't just the first number that shows up here. Remember, order doesn't matter in addition. A specifically is tied to the x squared term. B is positive 4, tied to the x term, and C is also positive 4. Let's go ahead and write that. A is 3, B is positive 4, and C is also positive 4. He identified our A, B, and C. And now the easy part is plugging into the formula, but the simplifying the formula is difficult. So I'm going to model, and you do not have to do this, but I just think it helps a lot of people with order of operations and what have you. So x is equal to the opposite of b. That's a -1 times b. Plus or minus, feel free to just write the plus and put the minus sign in later. Just don't forget it. B squared. I'm going to put parentheses around my b. Minus 4 times a times c. I'm going to write that as plus a -4 times a times c. All divided by 2 times a. Oops, I wrote the number, the letters. What's a? A is 3. What's c? C is 4. All right. All over 2a. And what is a? I did it again down there. What's a? A is 3. Oh no, I apologize. I got so ahead of myself that I actually wanted to write the whole formula for you and then plug in. I hope you don't mind, but I'm not going to delete this video just for that. Right? I'm just writing down the quadratic formula. The opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. It's very helpful for us to, until you have it memorized, it's nice to just have it written in front of you. So there we have it written in front of us, and we're going to go ahead and plug in a, b, and c. All right, so I just made a little bit more space to fit this on the first page. X is equal to the opposite of b, that's a -1 times b, and b for us is 4. Plus or minus, feel free to just write the plus and sneak the minus in later if it's visually overwhelming. The square root of this whole thing, we got to calculate that whole thing first before taking the square root. B squared, 4 squared. Minus 4 times a times c is the same thing as plus a -4 times a. A is 3 times c. C is 4. All divided by 2 times a. And a is 3. Okay? So now let's go ahead and simplify that. X is equal to -1 times 4, so a -4, plus or minus, I'm going to go ahead and write them both, the square root of 4 squared. 4 squared is 4 times 4, which is 16, plus a -4 times 3 times a -4, that's going to be negative, right? 4 times 3 times 4, that's going to be -48. All over 2 times 3, which is 6. Now, please don't make this common mistake and go, oh, I'm excited, square root of 16 is 4. And try to simplify that. You cannot take roots across addition or subtraction. I need to do the stuff underneath that square root first, and then take that square root. So x is equal to -4 plus or minus the square root of 16 minus 48, right? Plus a -48, adding you debt of $48 is like subtracting $48 from you. So I'm going to do 16 minus 48. 16 minus 48 is equal to negative 32. All over 6. And at this point, maybe it's because there's this minus sign in here. The square root of a negative has the I in it, right? Remember, the square root of -1 is defined to be that imaginary number I. It might be nice to write these two numbers as separate numbers. I think I'm going to do that right here. X is equal to -4 plus the square root of -32 divided by 6, or x is equal to -4 minus the square root of -32 divided by 6. Right, and maybe just because this is visually so overwhelming, let's just simplify the square root of -32 off to the side on its own. Let's just look at this little piece on its own. The square root of -32 is the square root of -1 times 32. Using my product property, I know that that's the square root of -1 times the square root of 32. So it's I times the square root of 32. And 32 has a perfect square factor in it, right? So 32 is divisible by 4. But notice how we still have another perfect square in there. 8 is also divisible by 4. 32 is divisible by 16. 32 is 16 times 2. So I'm going to take this a step further. 16 times 2, and use my product property one more. Oops, that one I wanted highlighted. One more time. We have I times the square root of 16 times the square root of 2, and the square root of 16 is 4, which we can also write as, and I think that's, let me look at the answer box here. Yes, they want the number before the I. Do you see how they've typed the I for me? So 4I times the square root of 2. Right, that's that nasty piece right here. The square root of -32 ended up being 4I times the square root of 2. And I think that writing, especially because we're pretty new to this stuff, I think that trying to do all of that simplification while being clouded by the fraction and the plus or minus symbol, I think that this is really helpful to go ahead and allow yourself a little bit of scratch for that. Okay, so here we have it. I'm now going to put in what the square root of -32 is. It is 4I times the square root of 2. I times the square root of 2. Okay, and we really want to be done, but remember, fractions are in their simplest form if there's no secret times ones in the numerator and the denominator, right? If there's no common factors. And notice here that 4, -4, 4, and 6 all have a factor of 2 in them. They all have a times 2 in them. So I want to factor that out and acknowledge that secret times 1. Right? 2 times a minus 2 would give me minus 4. Plus 2 times a 2i square root of 2. Right? Let's see it. 2 times 2 would be 4 times I times root 2 is 4i root 2. And 6 is a 2 times 2. And I'm not canceling 2's here. I'm acknowledging a little secret times 1. This guy is exactly the same, only instead of the plus, there's a minus. And maybe this is a nice way to write it, if this is helpful for you, to see the 1, 2 over 2 times a negative 2 minus 2i square root of 2 all over 3. Right? We multiply fractions straight across. Let's just see this. 2 times a minus 2 is minus 4. 2 times a minus 2 is a minus 4 times I times 2 is minus 4i root 2. And 2 times 3 is 6. This is the plus or minus. Pause the video, convince yourself that each term in the numerator has a factor of 2, and the denominator also has a factor of 2, so there's this secret times 1 going on there, right? So times 1 doesn't change anything, so x is equal to minus 2 plus 2i square root of 2 all over 2. I just copied this exactly, but I got rid of that secret times 1. Or x is equal to negative 2 minus 2i square root of 2 all over. Lindsay can't do multiplication. 6 is 2 times, 3. I caught my mistake when I looked at it up here, right? 6 is 2 times 3. 2 times 3. 3 in the denominator. 3. Beautiful. And if you want to write these two together, you can. And here's the answer, how we'll put it in the computer. We have x is equal to negative 2 plus or minus 2i square root of 2 all over 3. They have typed for us the plus or minus and the I. What we need to do is put in the right spots, the minus 2, the positive 2, and the 3. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so we have minus 2. They typed the plus or minus. 2i. And the square root part is the part that they want going last. And we had a square root of 2. And the denominator was a 3. All right, let's hit submit. We nailed it. Wow, right? That was a lot of work, but we did great. All right, thank you guys for watching. More videos to come.